What is going on, guys? I'm your host, Brett Morris. You have tuned into another episode of Recovery Revolution Live. I wanted to let you guys know that I just started a podcast audio only version of this. So it's available, I know, right now on iTunes and Spotify. I'm not sure about the others because there's a whole approval process. But if we do run into another blackout like we had today, you can catch up and listen to the audio only version over there. So go ahead and subscribe over there. And without further ado, I'm going to bring on tonight's guest, Joe. Welcome, Joe.
Hey, how's it going, Brett?
Good, man. Good. Glad to have you on the show, man.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, after this whole Facebook social media blackout today, it is interesting to see how things unfolded, but we're here. So
we made it. I wasn't sure if we were going to have a live show tonight or not, but they fixed it, so here we are.
Yes, sir. So just jump in.
Yeah, just jump in. Let's if you wouldn't mind sharing your story, that'd be great.
Yeah, for sure. So hello everybody. Joe Conniff, coming at you from Seattle, Washington right now. I give you some backstory about my experience. I am originally from Western Massachusetts, a little place called Agawam. Grew up out there. It's a little bit north of Hartford, Connecticut, a little east of New York. Grew up in a very, very small town out there, about 30,000 people. This is relatively small, but growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, grew up in a household with seemingly on the surface, pretty normal. My parents were together, had a lot of friends, went to public school. Kind of behind the doors of my house, though, my mom had been in an accident years earlier, back in the 70s, late 70s, and sustained a back injury that by the time I was 7 or 8 years old, my mom had been through plenty of surgeries. And by the time the mid 90s rolled around and what's, kind of unfolded as this opioid crisis that we've been in for some years now, was kind of the start of the overprescribing of Oxycontin, oxycodone, all that stuff. That became, a household medication. And, in conjunction with that, my father worked for an organized crime family that was based in New York. I grew up kind of Irish and French, but my dad was a mechanic for this organized crime faction, fixing video poker machines and pool tables and barroom equipment. So with my mom's back pain and her kind of emotional and physical unavailability that came with the over medication and, being pretty heavily prescribed opiates, I spent a lot of time with my old man, going in and out of bars, spending time around like low-level gangsters, drugs, drinking, gambling, just kind of a lot of, I was exposed to a lot of things by a young age that really, I was very much conditioned by the environment that I was exposed to. And, that as I got older, a lot of the things that I saw in my household was like internal dilemmas met with external solutions. It was like there was a drink for something, there was a pill for something, there was a compulsive behavior like gambling for something. There was some mental illness in my family, a lot of alcoholism, other substance use disorders. A couple of family members have been incarcerated, just, abusive relationships, things that just weren't talked about. So by the time I ended up in high school and started to experience some, as you'd say, social difficulties, kind of run of the mill, like things that teenagers are exposed to. It's like, hardships with their friends, hardships in relationships. And, I felt like there was some betrayals and things that kind of, again, kind of commonplace for, 15, 16 year olds, but I didn't really have the emotional wherewithal to deal with those things. And so, I had been exposed to like marijuana, drinking, a couple of the things that I did on the weekends with other kids, worked as like a busboy at a restaurant, 14, 15 years old, and kind of just dabbled with stuff. But by the time I was 16 or 17, and there were these kind of like really emotional upheavals that I didn't know how to deal with, my relationship with drugs and alcohol kind of changed overnight. It was like all of a sudden, it probably sound familiar. It's like drugs and alcohol did for me what I couldn't do for myself. It was like suddenly, it was like smoking marijuana in the morning, before school, after school, skipping school, was drinking during weeknights, drinking excessively on the weekends. And prior to that, like I had even tried cocaine a couple times, never just went all in on it. But when I found out that drugs kind of transported me to this place where I felt like I had some ability to control and manage, circumstances in my life, at least make them a little bit more tolerable, ease the blow of discomforting experience. I was like, man, I got to have this all the time. It's like, this is, as long as I can procure the means, the resources to get this, then I'm in a place that like my life is manageable and tolerable. I can deal with the idea of like, people are going to let me down. Things are not going to go my way. I just, as long as I got drugs, like things are good. And I made it through high school. Had really started to develop though, like a pretty serious cocaine habit by the time I graduated. And I graduated in 2001. Um, Spent that first summer right before 9/11, kind of really exploring how much cocaine I could put in my body, just how good I could make myself feel. It kind of mimicked these coping mechanisms that I felt I needed in my life, like this idea that I was going to be betrayed by people often. And if I could remain in a state of like hypervigilance, which cocaine was great at doing for me, I would feel guarded, I would feel safe. And so I kind of, I just pursued cocaine as far as I could. And after 9/11 happened, I'd been kind of working some odd jobs, and my dad was a little bit older. When I was 18, 19, he was already um, in his early 70s. And there was, he was like, hey, there may be a draft, maybe you should just join the service, get out of here. Like, you're getting into trouble with your drug use. And I kind of took him up on it. So shortly after 9/11 happened, by that winter, I was trying to get into the United States Navy. And problem was is I couldn't pass a UA to get into the service. It was like the night before I was supposed to go into the MEPS facility, the military entry processing station. I took a drink with some friends and knew that I had a UA next morning. But before I knew it, I was drinking, and somebody brought some blowout, and it was like, next thing you know, it was first thing in the morning, I had to provide a UA, and provided a positive UA. They told me I wasn't joining the Navy that day, and I kind of floundered around Western Massachusetts for another 3 or 4 months. And then finally, my dad had talked to another recruiter that was kind of, he was pretty convinced that he could find another way to get me in if I was willing to just enter the service, not have a contracted job or anything like that, and then figure out my military occupation once I got to boot camp. And so I managed to string together a week or two long enough that I could get in there past the UA. And I Very shortly after, I was, a member of the armed services, deployed in response to 9/11. I became an aviation ordnance technician, building up bombs and missiles in the Navy. I was stationed on the USS Harry S. Truman aircraft carrier. I did a couple deployments, but I found, like a lot of things that I've heard around addiction recovery, is it's like no matter where you go, there you are, right? That's I hadn't yet figured out how to change my relationship to the world without drugs and alcohol. So in my off time, I was drinking, and my drinking always led to drug use. And by my third year in the service, after I came back from my second deployment, my dad was dealing with cancer. My alcoholism had just kind of developed into full blown drinking all the time. And like the precariousness of that always led to cocaine use. And eventually I was discharged. I was discharged from my cocaine use, and I returned home to Massachusetts. Um, just really ashamed, kind of broken. And of course, I went back to the same place that I, had a hard time getting into the service from. And so I went right back to my old coping mechanisms. I got right back in with the crowds of people that were using drugs and alcohol back home. Before I know it, I was helping a friend run large quantities of cocaine and heroin to the Canadian border, doing these drives back and forth with him, making pretty good money, but more, what counted more than anything was I was just able to stay high all the time. Because that just like the pain of my life that, I had barely made it through high school. I'd gotten kicked out of the service. The only thing that provided any kind of relief was drugs. And I was trying to get as close to drugs as I could. And that would kind of be that would be the hallmark of my existence for the next 10 years or so after I got discharged. Is if you were the dealer, chances are I was trying to sleep on your couch. I was trying to be as close to you and willing to do, anything that, would get me drugs and alcohol. If it was driving you around, if it was, running errands for you, all kinds of stuff. It was just that lasted for made it about 2 years back in Western Massachusetts. And the guy my friend Pat, that I was doing these runs back and forth from northern Vermont up to the Canadian border. We were getting ready to do one of those runs one morning, and I found him in an overdose on March 7th, 2007. And we had a lot of drugs in the house. We had some firearms, all kinds of paraphernalia. And the other guy that I was with woke up, and I realized that Pat wasn't breathing. I didn't really know at the time. I wasn't really fully aware of what was happening. I had some ideas about it, but at the time it wasn't like people didn't talk about Narcan, naloxone, the way that most of the recovery communities, and even just the general public, have some familiarity with Narcan, at least in some of the circles I'm in these days. And I had to call 911, and in the process, trying to get the drugs out of the house. Is there before a lot of talk about Good Samaritan laws and those kind of things around overdose and possession of narcotics. And anyways, managed to get the drugs out of the house, tried to do some first responder stuff with Pat. They dispatched 2 detectives to the house. Turns out we had been under investigation for all the drug running that was happening. They were getting ready to do a bust on us. And I ended up handcuffed to a chair while they searched the house. And my friend Pat died on the stretcher by the time they got him out of the house. It had been too late. And it only took about another month and a half before I was trying to run myself out of Massachusetts. I was like, I gotta do the geographical change. I gotta figure something out. In that was just the loss of my friend, coming face to face with death and feeling so powerless about it, but still only wanting to turn to drugs as the only refuge, the only reliable sense of relief that I could get. Kind of left me at odds with everybody in my family that was still living in Massachusetts. My folks had since retired to California like a year prior. Most of my family knew, like, man, this guy's just, he can't finish his career in the Navy. He's hanging out with these guys that are dying because of overdose. Like, I just wasn't really welcome to a lot of places. And I got in touch with another guy that I had been in the service with. And he said, man, why don't you come out to Colorado? He said, come on out here, get a fresh start. And I kind of just jumped to the next plane that I could. I got out there and started kind of building up a decent, compared to where I was at. I started building a decent existence for myself there. I got a job driving trucks, delivering mattresses. saw almost all of the state of Colorado inside of 4 or 5 months, and is struck with the beauty of being in this new place. Of course, very soon I was like, well, where do I go when I go look for community? I'm going to go to the bar, because it's chances are I'm going to find people that are not knowingly, I think subconsciously it's like, yeah, there's people there that might know where there's drugs. They're dealing with life's difficulties the same way that I am. And before long, I was wrapped up in a relationship with a bartender, this woman that was there, and we were selling coke, and picked up a DUI that I just managed to resolve within the last year. That's how long I ran from stuff, and I've been in recovery for 6.5 years now, which I'll get to. But some of the destruction was so extensive. That's how long it took to try to clear some of that wreckage away, and so before long and having that DUI, I was kind of like, all right, like what's next? Like, where can I go next? I got to keep running from my issues. They're mounting, kind of like catch me if you can. And I ended up in Wyoming for a period of time, and I was up in the northeast corner, up in this little place called Newcastle, like 300 some odd people, or it was like 3,000 people in this small town. And of course, I managed to find the ones that were into meth and cocaine, and started running drugs back and forth from Denver up there. And I ended up meeting a woman there, and she grew up in Seattle. Her father owned the place that I was working at, and kind of had this relationship where all these external components were going to save my life. The drugs are going to save my life. Relationships are going to save my life. Somebody else, anything but me, anything but the idea of higher powers, anything, but this stuff is gonna resolve my issues. And so I chased that relationship back to the Pacific Northwest, where I am now. And just kind of the same similar circumstances. I got to the Pacific Northwest, got employed, landed a good job, produce wholesaling, doing all this stuff. And then I met the people that do the things that I do. And inside of about 2.5 years, we managed to get pregnant, have a miscarriage, got pregnant again. And we're pretty excited. This idea of having a daughter on the way. And terrible part about this is, as much as I had these aspirations to be a parent, to be a good partner, I couldn't leave drugs and alcohol behind. They were just too much of my life even though I had this nice road shaping up in front of me, that was not going to be enough to curb my appeal for drugs and alcohol, curb my addiction. And by late 2014, early 2014, my alcohol use, which was out in the open, my cocaine use was kind of behind the scenes a little bit. I spent a lot of time on the road, had a disagreement with my spouse, some push pull with the door, and slammed 3 of her fingers inside of the door and broke part of her hand, and caught a domestic violence charge, and had to move out of the house. Didn't get to see my daughter anymore. She was about 2 years old at the time. And found my way, living in my work van outside of the bars that I hung out at, and finally ended up shacking up with some guys that let me stay with them. And what they were into was heroin. And, that was the tragedy of my life at that time, how much pain I was in. The only thing that was giving me any relief, like cocaine wasn't working anymore. Alcohol wasn't working. Heroin was like, this is the stuff that works. Like, and, after losing my friend Pat, all the things that I had gone through around that, losing other friends in the opioid crisis, watching my mother with prescription opioids for years, even to this day, all of that, it still wasn't enough in that moment, because what it offered me was the relief that drugs and alcohol had promised early on. And this is where I was at with it. And I chased that as far as I could. And I ended up living up in motels off of Route 99 in North Seattle, what people would consider shooting galleries. I've been robbed at gunpoint. Been around all kinds of folks in the sex trade, offering protection to dealers just to be around them down on the block so I could get access to dope. And eventually ended up sleeping in Post Alley down behind Pike Place Market in Seattle for 4 or 5 months, and then finally caught a charge that for doing delivery of heroin for selling to support my habit in downtown Seattle. There was a big sting in the winter months of 2015, and they finally came downtown to close in on everybody. And there was about 180 dealers that were kind of surviving and living out of doors. Not everybody lived out there, but a lot of us that were kind of living in the streets and selling to support our habits. And I picked up a couple of charges that landed me in a drug diversion court. And so in May 2015, after being arraigned in drug court and let out to the community with a promise that I would come back in on Monday morning, I ran on warrant, made it a week, got picked up in this park in between the freeways of Seattle down by downtown and on I-5, and got picked up by some Homeland Security guy that was wandering around this federal park doing some kind of work there, and saw me getting well and brought me back in on the warrant. And I ended up doing 120 days in custody, but got access to outpatient style treatment while I was in custody. And that kind of gave me this jump start. Like, it was the first, I was in there with all these other guys that I had been out in the streets with, probably 40 or 50 other guys that got picked up in that sting operation. And we were all in there together. And at the time I was about 32 years old. I happened to be one of the older guys out of that community that were in there. And there were 2 or 3 other guys that were a little bit further ahead of me in the programming, waiting to do this in custody treatment programming, and then come out to the community, to drug diversion court, to the housing services that were provided, to the treatment services. These guys are a little bit further along, and they're like, look, man, like, if you're tired of this, if you're really serious about this, you got to come to these meetings that are happening a couple nights a week in here. You know, you got to take this treatment stuff seriously, man. Otherwise it's, it was going to be going to, one of the state locations and probably doing 2 to 3 years. That's what I was looking at a minimum. I had the possession of crack cocaine, delivery of heroin, and then I had these warrants around that domestic violence charge too. So I had these mounting things that if I can't get this right, all I'm going to do is get this break in prison, and that's probably not going to give me any tools. And so when I was in custody, I came across some Buddhist literature. I had like a 12-step book, I had the Bible and all these things, and I grew up in a Christian background. But I had difficulty with concepts of higher power around my mother's back pain, around all these like other pain and suffering that I saw in my life, that I had this idea that, a God or a higher power should be relieving these things. And I found this, this literature on meditation and mindfulness. And that really kind of, in conjunction with the idea of 12-step programming, with the other things that I was hearing in the treatment groups, is I learned to start to sit in my own skin. I learned, start meditating 5 or 10 minutes a day. I found a book on yoga. I started doing yoga practices. I started trying to find things that help me inhabit this body that for so long I had tried to just run from. And so I started producing this kind of daily regimen of, weightlifting. I became a trustee, doing these physical workouts, hanging out with people that were actually interested in bettering themselves, that weren't talking about how they're going to come back out to the community and do their ducking and diving and, drugging and running a little bit better and not get caught this time. I was like, man, I can't do that anymore. That last year that I was out there, I had about 7 arrests inside of a year. And I was just like, I can't do any more of this. And so, I got through my in custody treatment phase, and I had to wait for work release. But around that time, is having been a veteran, even though I lost a lot of my benefits because of my discharge here in Seattle and King County and Washington State, there was actually some acknowledgement that, look, as long as you've done some service, been in a combat zone, like we're willing to help you out. And so I got to finish up in this incarcerated veterans program that was willing to give me some shelter housing when I exited that, and I was being released to drug court services in the community. And during that time, I started doing everything that was suggested. It was like, get a sponsor, work the steps. I did the things around the 12-step rooms because those were the groups that were accessible. I also turned around and found that there was meditation and yoga practice in the community at the same time. And so, for this idea that I had used all this buffet of substances, I liked all this drugs and alcohol, constantly 4 or 5 different things at once. I'm like, man, I'm going to do this whole buffet of recovery. Like, there's nothing wrong with it. I don't need to just lock into one thing. and these ideas that take what you need, leave the rest at the door, So I went and sat myself up in these recovery fellowship halls, 2, 3 times a day. I went to the yoga practices. I did the meditations. I went to my court hearings. I hung out with people in recovery. This idea, people told me the 5 people you spend the most time with are the people you become. And I was like, well, that makes sense. Like I didn't become a heroin addict until I started spending time with people who were using heroin. Like I started really just seeing things really black and white. If I spend time with people in recovery, like I'm not going to have a choice but to kind of pick up some of this recovery business. And, so I went ripping and running through drug diversion court, sanction free inside of a year. And, during that time, I got the no contact order lifted with my daughter's mother. We started a small food business in Seattle. We were selling at farmers markets. I got offered yoga training for extremely low cost, and so I really kind of built up all of these spiritual tools. I went through the steps with a sponsor as fast as I could, but as thorough as I could. Made amends, and then the month after I graduated drug court, my father passed away. It was 2016. I lost my best friend the month later. And in that, didn't find it necessary to use. And what I did find is that I stayed close to the solution, the stuff that people told me, like, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. So, when I left drug diversion court, I still had a service position as a secretary for Back to Basics meeting at Cherry Fellowship Hall in Seattle. Really awesome fellowship hall up in the Central District in the heart of Seattle. That was kind of like, that's the place I got sober. Doing a little bit of yoga teaching and meditation practice. And so I had stayed close to a drug diversion court because it was the off ramp from the system that really gave me my life back. It helped resolve some of my other criminal legal matters too, with the domestic violence charges. And about 6 months after I graduated drug court, I was offering to be of service to other people that were still in the drug court program. And then the drug court program in King County at the time, there was about 300 active participants at any given time right here in Seattle. And so I found that there's probably some opportunity for me to share my experience, what it was like to go through the program, coming off of the streets, out of homelessness, and help carry somebody else through just with my experience, in times that they're having difficulty. And the treatment program manager at the time was like, man, there's actually this position opening up. It's contracted through one of the treatment agencies, but, maybe you'd think about applying and becoming a resource specialist. And, I was like, my small business was taking off. And as far as I was concerned, my dreams were coming true. Like I was sober. I'm in my daughter's life. I'm with, her mother again. I started this business that I, for years, had wanted. And, all of a sudden this idea of like actually, recovery work becoming like my sole vocation in life was like, wait, like I kind of really dig this. And, on this, if I can want to be as close to the drugs and alcohol as I could for, the last 16 years prior to that, like, let me get as close as I can to this recovery stuff. Like, and I was like, this is probably the best insurance policy I can possibly get myself connected to. And within 6 months of graduating drug court, I was hired on as a resource case manager. And a couple months later, I put in to be a Washington State certified peer counselor, go for that training. I went through becoming a CCAR, certified recovery coach, or a recovery coach credential. I became a mindfulness teacher in 2019. In 2020, I was getting ready to leave drug diversion court because I was working for a nonprofit. And at the time, my program manager made the run at making my position a county position there. Something which I was just was really what I wanted, because I was like, man, I got kicked out of government employment 16 years prior, or not 16 years prior, about 10 years prior. But I never thought I'd be working for the government again. And that turned out to become my reality back in February of 2020. And, so at this point, the last year and a half has been probably some of the most productive in my recovery. Had to adapt to offering peer support services to the people that I work with in drug court. I facilitate daily recovery support groups for people in the program. I teach mindfulness a couple days a week to them, do grief and loss support. And then I had spent the last 3 years being involved and all these different things like legislative forums. I got to go to Mobilize Recovery back in 2019, see a lot of pictures from folks in our national recovery community going out there. It was awesome. I got to go be part of the inaugural conference that went down. And then, a lot of that stuff inspired me to really write about my journey. People were asking me to share about it. I'm like, man, I got to have this someplace that I can point people to. And so in December 2020, I finally, I published my memoir, Causes and Conditions, a life experience in addiction and recovery. I actually got a copy here. This is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble online. I finally was like, I just wanted something out there that I could point people to. Books changed my life. Recovery stories changed my life when I was in custody. I read Noah Levine's Dharma Punks when I was in there. I read other short memoirs, of folks of the Christian recovery, other things. And it was people's inspiring stories and one-liners and things like that that saved me at some of the most difficult times when I didn't have access to community. Those times when I wasn't able to make it to a meeting for whatever reason, it was other people's stories. And so, kind of the idea of what would be the hallmark of, success and recovery is that if I could put my story out there somewhere, somebody could tangibly put their hand on it. And that was the only mark of success I ever had for the book, was if one person tells me it helps them. And the area where I grew up in Western Massachusetts has just been ravaged, as most of the country has, and especially in rural communities, by opioids, and then everything else that's ensued with addiction to follow, with the epidemics. And I've just had people reach out to me from back home, just like, man, this is so fascinating. Like, I remember you growing up. I had no idea what you went through. And, the book was just a way it was probably the most thorough inventory I've ever written. I've done some 4 steps. I work, for the most part, the last few years, I've worked the Refuge Recovery Buddhist program. I've sat 10-day silent meditation retreats to deepen my practice. Most of my recovery is really more mindfulness based focus. But it's just this desire to share all these different things that worked. And putting a book out, writing about that, connecting with other advocates, staying so plugged into this has been what's sparked my recovery day after day after day. And being close to the community here, being in positions to be able to help advocate for change in my community, the things that I see that need to happen. The idea of, I came from a very hard abstinence focused background. I thought that drug court was the best thing in the world. I thought that abstinence only recovery was the only thing that really mattered, that it was the gold standard. And I started to realize that my thinking also wasn't helping other folks get access to any kind of freedom, any kind of liberation. I needed to open my mind. And, so it put me in places where I started to explore other recovery programs. I started to connect with what other advocates are doing in other areas. And with that, expanded my awareness to hear about stuff in like the 12 steps of, growing and understanding and effectiveness, and, being in spaces where conversations that weren't just co-signing my beliefs and the things that I found were consistent with my recovery and my experience, is learning to embrace other things, so that like there is some sort of path out, there's some way to help everybody, no matter where they're at, behavioral health crisis, mental illness, substance use disorder. And so, where I'm at this point in my recovery is I'm putting together a second book right now, looking at other ways to, other positions that are available within, my local community to, maybe advocate for more change, maybe bring my lived experience to the higher level, implement new programs, on some task forces about overdose emergency, people just access to health, just access to care, just things that so many people are like, there's so much stigma around behavioral health issues that it's just such a barrier to services for people. And so finding other ways to advocate for the changes in my community that put my lived experience at the table, so that there's opportunity for change to happen by some of us that have actually been through it. So, and, one of the other things I'll add is in this last year too, is I've still had the opportunity to work on some stuff in my recovery. I mentioned catching a DUI in Colorado in 2008. And this journey continues. Like, I didn't have the finances for a long time to spend 5-6 grand on an out-of-state DUI and going through that. And fortunately, because of the pandemic, I never had to take a trip to Colorado. The work that I do in drug court and having written a book, got to go to the judge's bench and got to advocate. My attorney got to advocate for the lowest amount of things. I had to do 10 days of house arrest. 6.5 years sober, and part of it is I got to do that. It's I want to clean up the wreckage. Want to have that experience to tell other people that doesn't always get easier. It gets different, and at times it does. It's progress, not perfection. It's a long road ahead for some folks, and I've been really fortunate. As I say in my book, I'm truly fortunate to have lived 2 lives in one lifetime. And I got to thank drugs and alcohol for that. I've seen the best of things and the worst of things. So really a pleasure to be here with everybody tonight. Happy to take any questions. If there's anything I missed out, I'm very much an open book, having put a book about my life out there. Appreciate everybody who's tuned in and who get a chance to see this.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that story, man. That was absolutely incredible. And about 5 minutes into the episode, we got comments started coming in because we were having some Facebook difficulties, but it looks like they're up now, so that's awesome. So yeah, if anybody has any questions for Joe, please put those in the comments, and I'll read those out for everybody to and put them on the screen as well. I like what Karen said up here a couple minutes ago. She said it's called being sober dosed.
Yeah. Time and time again. It's been there's these marks. I mean, people call them God shots, coincidences. Like I said, I'm not one much for higher power stuff personally, but I have how that shows up for me in a mindfulness based recovery practice is I live by certain principles, certain guidelines. In Buddhism, it's called the Eightfold Path, and it makes it so that living by those principles, like we do in 12-step programs, or any type of other spiritual living, is it makes my mind a better place to have to operate from. It makes it an easier place for me to sit with day after day, and in that, when I pursue that, is like the beauty of life continues to show up, the opportunities continue to arise, and it's not always easy, but it's this ability to actually, my relationship with the world is understanding that there's going to be things that are unsatisfactory about it. Like, there's nothing promising me a pain-free existence. That's been important to understand. It's like, just life at times is unsatisfactory. Drugs and alcohol can change that briefly. Doesn't last. It's just, there's nothing wrong with me. Doesn't mean I'm a bad addict. I think I was really good at it for a while. Like, I tried hard as hell to stay on one 24/7. It's just impossible. And I have a tendency to take things personally. That's part of the human condition. And in that causes me some trouble. And at other times, it's just things are just the only constant is the nature of change. And so, when I see those 3 things, in the way that I practice, that's called the 3 marks of existence, is I'm here in this human form. I'm going to be subjected to those things. And if I can understand that that's happening, I'll find the ability to move along with life. And in that is, happiness is not something that I get to hold on to. It's something that I find. It's something I get to be along the way, learning to live kind of a little bit more in harmony with the world in the way that I had been.
Nice. We got one question from Ian that came in a minute ago. Let me scroll up here and find it. Where did it go? No, I'm not seeing. Oh, there it is. He said, when or what triggered you finally to get clean and sober? Any events?
That's a really good question. Thanks, Ian. I think, because I mentioned I had been arrested about 7 times that last year. There was one in particular, and I talk about this in my book. I have a friend that I knew from the street, somebody that I used with, and it was when I was I had gotten picked back up on the warrant for drug court. Like, I'd already been arraigned at drug court. I knew that was on the table. But then they picked me up on the warrant and they let me sit for about 2 weeks. And I was like, man, I can't keep doing this. Like, sure, I think many folks have been like, I can't continue to do this. And then we get released, we do things, we go back out, we do it, right? Like we do it again anyway. And I was waiting in the bullpen one day, where the attorneys come in, kind of disclose all the paperwork and those things. And this guy, all of a sudden I heard somebody call me by my nickname out on the street. And I looked over and I kind of recognized him, but didn't. And finally he let me know who he was, and he had put on some weight. He had he caught some federal charges and he was waiting to go into drug court. And, during that time he had been sober and he put some weight on and started working out, was feeling healthy. And he was somebody that I knew. He used the way that I did. He ran around the streets the way that I did. And this dude was sober. And he was in drug diversion court. He had, like I said, he had waited to get in, but he was one of those guys who was a little bit ahead of me. And he just looked at me and he's like, man, you look like you're getting your ass kicked out there. And I was like, yeah, man, like I am. And I can't explain why I continue to do it. And he's like, you gotta, man, he's like, you don't have to do this. You can take your charges and go mainstream, go to prison, or you can try this drug court thing, man. Hey, I'm down at the facility in the South End. If you go in that courtroom and say yes, just say you want to take drug court, you want to take it for a spin, they'll send you down there in 2 days. They'll have you roll it up here downtown. You'll go down to that in-custody treatment program. I'm a trustee. He's like, let me feed you. Let them, get in this workout regimen with me, hit the meetings, and then if you don't like it, that whole idea, like your misery will be refunded. He was like, you can take your case mainstream at any time, and they'll release you and you can go run again if you want, until they pick you up. And I remember that experience was so profound, because I was just kind of chewing on it. And I went into the courtroom, and without even thinking about it, they told me what was available to me. They said, you can go to the in-custody treatment program, or you can take it mainstream and go to prison. And I just I heard my friend, we call him Jolly. I remember Jolly's words, and he's like, man, just do it. And I just said, okay, I'll take drug court. Like, send me to the in-custody treatment program. I don't care. I'll do the 120 days, whatever. I don't even know what's on the other side of that. I'll do it. And it was like, it all happened so fast. I was like, what did I just agree to? I don't know what's on the other side of this. Nothing. I just, this idea of just attached to doing things my way, I just let go. People would say, let go, let God. I just let go. And I went back to the bullpen. He was gone. Like, it was like seeing a ghost. I was like, why did I run into him? Like, why did this happen today? Like, and then a week later, I was down in the Regional Justice Center in Kent, and I was walking through the doors, and there he was. He was like, man, here's the table. Here's where we're hanging out. Like, kind of this, like, stick with the winners thing. These are the dudes doing the recovery business. Those guys over there, they've got drugs coming into the unit. You want to make this thing work. You want to give yourself a fair shake. You got to do this. And I got to say, I credit him with that conversation, now the long way around to respond to Ian is, it was that moment. It was the peer perspective. That's why I value peer work so much. Is he's not a peer counselor by any means. It was just in that moment, he said something. He had a message that carried depth and weight. And in that moment, it was what I needed to hear. And it was what I needed to see. Because I'm like, man, I know how this guy runs. Like, if this is working for him, man, there's a chance this thing can work with me. And to this day, he's still in recovery. We don't talk that often. He's got good things going for him, though. But it was that moment in time that really, really did it.
And Ian responded there in the comments, and he said, I did 10 years and still couldn't stay clean. I ran the game from the inside. Finally, after finding my best friend overdosed from fentanyl and suffering with PTSD, I got help. I was next to die, not ready to die high. Thank you for your knowledge and wisdom, Joe.
Ian, thanks for sharing that on here. And then, my condolences for that part of your experience. And it's, man, the grief is, I think the grief is one of the things, there's like the survivor's guilt I hear about in a time where some of us are getting this and some of us aren't. And I hear things like, some of us have to die for some of us to live. And I got to say, like, I can't stand that statement, because I think a lot of it has to do with some of our drug policy. I think some of us will die and some of us will live. But I think some of this is really about changing the narratives. It's like, man, and it's hard, that grief of like, making it out of this when our friends have, or somebody having a return to use, a recurrence of use. And and it being that one time that the tolerance isn't there, and and we're losing people. And I think grief was one of the things that kept me out there. I carried that weight of losing Pat for years. Like I got loaded behind that every day. Like I got loaded behind all the other losses for so long. And grief shows up a lot of different ways, and it's one of the things I've worked the most with in my recovery is that I even grieve my life as an addict. I mean, like it was hard to make the transition from addiction to recovery. Like drugs was a thing I relied on for a long time. It's hear people like Gabor Mate say, like, man, it's my best attempt to solve a problem, and it worked shortly. And so it was only, I think, as he says, it's only misguided in the long term, because on the front end it does work. And so it's these cycles, that I ended up, and I'm sure some other folks can probably have that experience, but that's what it was like for me. And it was, the minute I took a drink, I thought it was relieving the grief, but then I kind of ended up ruminating on it. And it wasn't until I learned to deal with loss and process, the childhood that I thought I wanted, the relationships that I thought I deserved, the jobs that I thought I wanted but didn't get. Like, I had constructed ideas about what my life would have been. I had to grieve the fact that I threw away my military career. I had envisioned myself doing 20 years, in the Navy. And I realized that a lot of my difficulties were around my inability to let go of things that I had, these ideas I constructed about who I was going to be. And before I knew it, I was 32, and I was a heroin addict in custody. I was like, this was not what I had this was not in the cards, the way I was looking at things. But man, years went by. And so I think that's been the most valuable work that I've had to do is learning to live with loss, most likely people, but there's a lot of things that I've tried to build up that just didn't come out the way that I wanted to. And I wrestled the world into a way that I would try to get those things to come to fruition.
Ian just put another comment on there, and he said, "Now that I'm straight, my other friend just committed suicide, and I'm learning on a daily basis. The world outside doesn't slow down. Learning how to cope with it is all. Learning to cope with it all is my blessings. Thanks again, Joe."
Man,
Mm.
yeah, and Ian, it's the loss out there is it's very real right now, and it's I think around these kind of things too is, death and loss it's an injustice. It's especially when it comes to things like drug policy, the prescription opioid crisis. There's a lot of injustice associated with this, and so I think anger is a really natural response, right? Is it's and anger becomes a great motivator for social change, but it's like trying to harness that, to this place where it doesn't, for me, it doesn't consume me. You can use it to motivate staying on this course and making, recovery in whatever capacity a reality for people. But it's hard, when the blows keep coming. It's like at 3 overdoses inside of 8 days 2 weeks ago, and one of them was a kid that I grew up with that had just put together a couple years in recovery, got his daughter back, had a recurrence of use, died just like that. And then two clients that had, one of them who had come through the program and graduated, relapsed, passed away, and another one that I that didn't complete the program, went back out to the streets and was on the overdose bulletin from the medical examiner. And it was like, that was somebody that I had survived in the streets with, somebody who, when nobody was doing anything else for me and my family, like I understand why, like this was a guy that was sharing blankets with me and things like that. When I had nothing else in the street, I mean, the people that had nothing, that were strung out and stuff like me, were probably some of the most generous people I'd ever met in my life. And that's what made some of those losses even harder, is being out there surviving with people that aren't getting this opportunity that I did, and it's those are those realities, it's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, Ian said, "My condolences, brother." And a few
Thanks,
minutes,
man.
yeah, and a few minutes ago, he said, "My acceptance has really helped."
Mm, acceptance. Yeah. That's another one that for me, I've had to, um, any, by no means am I trying to talk at you. I like some of the things that you're bringing up, but acceptance was something that for a long time is I had a difficult relationship with, right? Like this, hear things, and like in the 12-step room was like, acceptance is the key to all my problems. I felt like for me, for a while, I felt like, and this is my own, misinterpretation of things, is acceptance felt like me that I was like relinquishing, the opportunity for positive action about stuff. And it was like, try to explore acceptance a little bit, is had nothing to do with that. It was like just letting things be as they are, accepting it for how it shows up. And then from there, being able to figure out how to take skillful, action rooted in wisdom of my experience. I don't make the same chuckle-headed decisions I used to, so that I'm doing things that are not rooted in selfishness. And it's really been about, a lot of these exploring these principles and these ideas around recovery to the place that I, to the degree that I explore drugs and alcohol. Like, let me really get down and dirty with some of these one-liners, with some of these principles, and really explore these, because after a while it was like I found disagreements with, some of the dogmatic aspects of a lot of recovery programs. And I'm like, but there's a lot to take away that I can put to use in my life and still, keep the wheels turning. And, and it's like there's the nature of change is, having to operate in a pandemic world and culture right now is it's like the way we engage recovery is pretty radical these days. It's like widespread. There's accessibility to it everywhere, but yet like some of these other foundational components of fellowship and things that used to happen in person that were some of the primary drivers for how I managed to stay sober and build community. I'm like, what is it like to find recovery in a pandemic world, like in places where you can't be in those spaces together, due to either whether city or county or government ordinances and those things at times. It's wild.
Yeah, it is for sure. There's a comment that Karen made that I really liked. It says, "Every day is new, and truth is, it starts with us individually to change and mold into becoming the best us possible by turning our pain into power, our lessons into blessings, and progressively keep moving forward, loving ourselves and each other."
Yes. I've got my loving kindness shirt on right now. I forgot which way my shirt is, but the mirror image of this. And yeah, I think that's such a loving kindness. I think it's so important, right? Like when we learn to love ourselves is when recovery begins, right? And in that,
Mhm.
I found ways to learn to love others. I was trying to control the world around me. I wanted people to do things certain ways. That was all part of my addiction, right? It was just kind of loving kindness. Now it's a big foundation in the mindfulness practices that I do. It's called metta in the Buddhist practices. And yeah, it's just one of those things that bringing it to all of our experiences, right? Even to like how things are unfolding in the world for me right now, is bringing a kind, generous, loving, kind curiosity to what's happening, right? It's this kind of coming at things non-judgmentally. And if I'm going to come at it with anything, come at it with love, come at it with kindness. I've come at it with anger and disdain and trying to manipulate things, but I tried that way for a long time. Didn't work out well.
Then we got a comment. I think it's from JR. It's somebody that's on the Recovery Revolution page, one of the admins. He said, "Joe, would it be okay to add your book to our shop?" He's looking to add more sober authors to the shop and promote their books.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me know if there's anything I can or need to do to assist that process. Yeah, happy to do that. And I appreciate that opportunity too. Thank you.
Yeah, it looks like he just needs a Amazon link.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll send that. I'll send that over. Whatever the best way is after this for sure.
And then Karen said, "You can't control others, but you and yourself alone can and do control how you react and cope to one's actions."
That's real talk right there. Yeah,
Ian wants to know if after 6 years of sobriety, are there any temptations?
it's a good question. Is you know, there's places in town that I traverse, as part of my daily living and as part of my work that, I don't want to, I wouldn't say temptations, but man, there's some walks down memory lane that happen from time to time. It's really hasn't been about the drugs and alcohol for a long time, but it's looking now at, there's temptations to act out on behaviors that lead me to difficult places that have led me to drug use in the past. And that's part of like my mindfulness work, is really like drugs and alcohol were a symptom of all the other issues that I was experiencing. And so looking at, how I work with my anger, how I work with my grief, those things that I mentioned, because those are the things that, like, my best solution is the drugs and alcohol. And so when I end up in those spaces of town, where I know there's a lot of, there's open air drug markets, there's use happening in the open, is, again, I think it's part of it is not forgetting where I come from with things, but also there's, some extending that idea of that loving kindness to the people that are still out there. And again, it's another one of those opportunities to really just, play the tape back through. Is I'm not convinced by any means that there's anything that drugs and alcohol can offer me at this point in my life that I can't do for myself for those brief periods of time. It's and it's difficult, it's I think now there's a little bit it's, the temptation with the recovery work, the edge is off a little bit more, realizing that it's an even more serious game of Russian roulette. Like, I got away with all kinds of crap, I survived all kinds of horrific episodes in my drug use, and right now it's like, having this time away from drugs and alcohol that I have, it's, seeing the seriousness of it in a light that I never had before because of, the fentanyl poisoning and things like that. I'm like, man, some of the things that I used to engage, some of the things that I used to use that shouldn't have opiates in them have opiates in them now, like fentanyl. I'm like, I don't understand any of it. And so, that kind of thing, there's actually a healthy fear of drugs, not in this like that they'll ruin my life. There's actually a healthy fear of drugs that I never had ever before in my life. Like, man, it's actually pretty damn scary these days, like what's going on out there. And so not having to be in bondage to drugs and alcohol anymore and be at the mercy of, like, not caring what's in my dope is, that's a freedom like no other right now.
Yeah, for sure. JR said, Joe, I want to buy 2 autograph books, one for the podcast giveaway and one for my personal library. Can I PayPal you?
Yes, you know what, I've only got paperbacks available right now at my home. But I could definitely, I'll connect with you after this, and I'll get an address, and if paperbacks are cool, because I can get those. It'll take me a while to get some hardcovers in, but I'd be happy to do those paperbacks, get them out.
Nice.
Autographed and everything.
He said paperbacks work. Nice.
Okay, cool.
Karen said, please don't fear your next chapter. You are the author of your personal story.
I think that's right there. That's something that I honestly experience today as I'm truly writing the future. Like, there's a lot that's out of my hands, but I have some say and some skin in the game as to what happens in my life these days. I actually just enrolled in school for the first time and in my life, like post-secondary education, and I want to go for social work. And it's interesting. It's about writing, the next chapters is I'm so rooted in these experiences I had from when I was 17, 18 years old, and I was getting ready to go to community college in Massachusetts, that I have this fear of, like, doing the schoolwork, and, like, not a healthy sense of fear when I came to it starting school last week, but it was rooted in all these old experiences that I had. And I'm actually at a place now where, actually writing a new chapter that's absent of these old fears, of these old barriers to my success and those kind of things that I used to experience. And I really appreciate seeing that. I'm sorry, I forgot who put it in the chat, but super, super helpful. I think it's all about kind of the accessibility to freedom and liberation that comes is, there's actually I think creativity is probably one of the most wonderful things that I found in recovery. I was creative in my addiction. I was creative in my ability to get drugs and alcohol, but not a healthy sense of being creative. And now the things that I get to do with that creativity are not rooted in selfishness and self-centeredness. They're rooted in, in a desire to help other people, and that's a total 180 from the kind of the way that I lived for, 16 years. So yeah, things are a lot better.
Yeah, for sure, man. Let's see. It looks like JR's wanting to do a giveaway. He's got a book. Are we doing the Victoria's Voice book, JR, or which one? What are we wanting to do here? I'm waiting on him to send me a message back to
Well,
see what
I got one of those at Mobilize, at Victoria's Voice. Yeah, I've got that on my shelf.
nice.
Yep.
I haven't gotten a chance to read that one yet, but it looks like I think I think that's what we're doing tonight. So oh, we got some more comments coming in. Turn your pain into power, your lessons into blessings. Nice. We're gonna do let's do a number between 1 and 25, and whoever gets the number gets the book. Oh, and it looks like he's also wanting to do a copy of your book as well, Joe. So we'll do the Victoria's Voice first, and then we'll do a giveaway for a copy of Joe's book second.
Mm.
We got Ian with 23. Nope, not quite. Not there, man. It's not it. $15, 10, 8, 27. It's 1 through 25, Karen, so you're a little over there. 4, 3, no. You guys are going in the wrong direction. Carrie was pretty close a second ago. 714. No, not 714. Not 7. No. 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 2. No. 16. Nope.
Is there anything left?
There's at least one number left because they haven't got the number. They haven't got the number yet. No, not 25, Karen. Let me make sure I didn't miss it. Let me scroll back up here. No, they haven't got it yet. Oh, Ian's real close. Oh, no, he's going the wrong way. Ian's just going down one at a time.
Get a winner in there somewhere. Right?
Man, they're hitting all around it. There's one number you guys are missing, and it's the right number. Now Ian and Karen are going the wrong way. They're going up. It's a smaller number. 16. All right, Ian's getting closer. All right, Ian got it. The number was 12. Nice.
Boom. There it
So
is, man.
Ian, you got the copy of Victoria's Voice. And then it looks like JR, he said earlier he's going to buy 2 copies, so one for himself, and then he's wanting to do a giveaway of a copy of Joe's book. So we'll do what's another game we can do to give away another book? You got any ideas, Joe?
Oh man. No, I would be just totally honest. I'm fresh out of ideas at the moment. Especially when I'm on the spot, man. I'm not gonna be helpful in producing a game. I'm
I
sorry.
feel you. I feel you, man. I have like no ideas whatsoever. We could do another number. Um
Let me pick like 26 through 50.
there you go. Yeah, we'll do 26 through 50 for Joe's book.
There's my contribution.
That works. So 26 through 50.
You're thinking of the number though, right?
I'm thinking of a number.
Okay.
Yeah. I've got it. I got it locked in. Ian's going for both of them. He's trying to get them both, man. Oh, he's starting at the top and he's working his way down. Karen's not too far off. No, not it's not 27, Karen. Not. Oh, Karen got it 42.
All right.
All right, Karen. So Karen, you got a copy of Joe's book. Oh, and there's Ian saying 42. He was a second too late, man. All right, Karen. So I guess get with us after the show or send a message to the Recovery Revolution page and JR will get all that figured out. So we got Ian won tonight and so did Karen. Very very nice, guys.
Good stuff.
Yeah. All right, guys. Are there any other questions for either me or Joe or anything you guys want to know? All right. Well, as a reminder, in case you guys weren't here at the beginning of the show, this past weekend I started uploading the audio only version of this live event of the live show as a podcast. So, in case we go through another social media blackout like we experienced today, you can still get the show, just not without the visuals, just the audio version. Oh, here's a question. How long did it take you to write your book?
Um, I'm gonna say I think I started. Let me see, January 2018. I started writing and published it in December 20. About 2 years. Yeah, but I was going at it pretty hard. I was giving it for a while there. I was giving it 3 hours a day while I was putting the nuts and bolts together, and then kind of got some feedback from some friends and family, and then I was able to kind of pump the brakes a little bit. And then those last few months before I published it, it was getting 2 or 3 hours a day again, man. It was pretty exhausting, and it's getting ready to put this. Got a lot of material on a second book, and it's kind of like reminding me some of the exhaustive nature of the process. But yeah, Karen, happy to get this book out, and feel free to reach out if there's questions, if there's anything that doesn't get answered in there, and appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. Yeah, consumed you for about 8 months. Yeah, it's hard to, like, that momentum gets going. And it was difficult. I was like, I'm creating something. I'm going to be an author. I'm writing my story. And it's interesting, as I will say, is I'd encourage anybody to write their story, even if you don't publish it. I think I found so much therapeutic value. I found a voice for my recovery in a way that, like, I can't describe here. It's something that I found myself early on trying to tailor the book to what I thought people wanted to read, and in that, as I felt like it lacked authenticity. Like, I was trying to convey a voice that it wasn't really me. And as I found the therapeutic value of writing, I was like, I can add some components of comedy and those things, but I changed my relationship to my past too. And that is, I was able to do a lot of forgiveness work for myself as well as other people, but also um, really trying to see, my sister's on here. Hey, Dawn. Awesome. Glad you tuned in. Yeah. Yeah. You're in the book too. It's been a big part of my life, big support of my recovery. It's, I think the value of not like it's rewriting the experiences, but being able to see them in a way that it showed the humanity of the other people in my life, the things that I dealt with, the difficulty with my mom, the things that I experienced in my family, allow me to see it through a lens that shed the resentment and these other things that I hear about so consistently themed around recovery, that really helped me open my heart. And in that is, I think I opened my awareness about, recovery too, in that is because I was like, man, I really want this to be accessible for people in one way, shape, or form. And I found different things about it in that process. Yeah, there's so much value, I think, in that writing piece.
Good stuff, man. I think I forgot to mention if you guys are looking for the podcast version of this show, it's called Recovery Revolution Live. I don't think I said the name of the show, so there's that little piece that might help you because there's another podcast called Recovery Revolution. So there's two different recovery shows that are have similar names.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. I punched it in the other day and I noticed that, and I was like, wait, I think I know that guy too. Like,
Yeah, there's definitely a pretty tight knit community of different recovery podcast people, and I'll see different posts, and I'm like, wait, that person looks familiar. I'm like, oh, they have, oh, I know who they are.
yep. Man, people pumping out hope and sharing experiences. That's what's up, though.
Yeah, for sure, man. Awesome. Well, if there aren't any other questions, I guess we could wrap it up. And while we're plugging our stuff, I also have another podcast called Recovery Survey, and it's little bite size, little pieces of recovery, little messages of overcoming and triumph and strength and hope, and like 30-minute episodes. So if you guys are looking for more recovery content, be sure to check that podcast out. Be sure to check out Joe's book. I'm sure we're going to be posting that all over the Facebook page after this episode goes out. So be sure to check that out.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for being on tonight, Joe. It was great having you on here.
Yeah, pleasure to be here too. Really, really grateful for this opportunity. Thank you, Brett. Thanks, JR, and then everybody for tuning in. I'm glad to see I had some family on here. I know my sister Dawn, my cousin Cheryl, and everybody else that contributed in the comments. Really, really appreciate the support. This is what makes this a reality for everybody, and so I appreciate everybody turning out, even though many of you didn't know me. Like, this is what it's all about. Love y'all. Take care.
And I gotta find my button to. There's the closing screen.